My piece over the weekend is called Africa, the Belle at the Ball. I remember a time when my 11-year-old daughter Layla had attended the school disco, and when I picked her up, her eyes glittered and she could scarcely stand still, and I asked, "Darling, how was it?" And she said to me, "Daddy, I danced and I danced and I didn't stop." I wanted to pick her up and spin her because, as Rhys wrote in her novel Wide Sargasso Sea, only the magic and the dream are true, all the rest's a lie. And I must remember about chandeliers and dancing, about swans and roses and snow. The reason my mind looped back to my 11-year-old Layla was because the Financial Times' David Billing had asked me about Theresa May's visit to Africa. I had described the mood music around the trip as quite sweet, and according to David, I was one of the few commentators to praise the Prime Minister's dancing in Cape Town. I thought Theresa May deserved a big up, and also said, because of its history, Britain has a lot of leverage and indeed ground-level knowledge of the continent. So in a post-Brexit world, it makes sense to sweat its African equity. I also said Britain preceded China and the US and is seeking to play to that advantage. This is largely a born-free generation, and the UK is wise to play to that theme for multiple overlapping reasons. The reason dancing and giddiness came to mind was because Africa has been a little swept off its feet over the last few days. Since June, Narendra Modi, India's Prime Minister, Recep Erdogan, President of Turkey, Xi Jinping, President of China, have all made African forays. Emmanuel Macron, President of France, has visited the continent 3 times since November. President Kenyatta was received by President Trump. Prime Minister Theresa May dialed up Africa last week, as did Angela Merkel. And now just about everyone has trooped off to China to make win-win music with Xi Jinping and his FOCAC gig. John Ashbourne said African politicians should be praying for a Sino-Western bidding war for their affections, a huge opportunity if they can play it well. Howard French responded no, they should go one step further and devise well-thought-out development strategies based on a deep reading of national interest, generating as much local financing as possible and pushing hard on regional integration. So we might well ask, what is going on? Let me give you some hardcore data. The 50 countries in sub-Saharan Africa have a combined output of $1.4 trillion, less than half the size of France's economy. According to the IMF estimates for 2018, from 2000 to 2016, China loaned around $125 billion to the continent, data from the China-Africa Research Initiative at Johns Hopkins. Chinese goods exports to Africa are 8 times larger than those of the UK and even bigger than the top 3 exporters, Germany, France and the US combined. A wave of African nations are looking to restructure debt with China on the eve of the FOCAC summit in Beijing, and this provides a reality check. Ethiopia and Zambia, heavy borrowers from China, have expressed desire to restructure that debt, while bankers believe Angola and Congo Republic have already done so. Though details of such deals are sparse, the IMF says Cameroon, Ghana and others face a high risk of debt distress, as does Djibouti, whose main source of foreign loans is China, the fund says, and which holds the majority of external debt. China had a singular and positive influence on Africa. It rebalanced the demand side for Africa's commodities and also bought those commodities on a long-term basis. It was this which triggered the African recovery some 2 decades ago. However, since then, a freewheeling China Inc. has favoured elites, has facilitated large-scale looting via inflated infrastructure, some of which were white elephants on day one, and has lumped the African citizen with the tan. How this plays out now is the key to Sino-African relations going forward. A Hambantota scenario would be problematic. That was with reference in the Sri Lankan port, which has been leased to China for 99 years. The West is pushing back for a number of reasons, certainly since uncorking Libya, immigration in Europe is a big theme. There is a clearer sense that in order to stem immigration, Europe needs to put its shoulder to the wheel and look at how to stimulate African economies and job creation. President Trump is also rattling Xi Jinping's golden cage and surely wants to bottle up China in the South China Sea, and hence the Indian Ocean becomes central. It even got a mention in Trump and Uhuru's press release. However, most of all, the West sees a very big debt crisis looming and is positioning for the fallout. The dominoes have already started to fall. Now we will really find out if Xi Jinping is Santa Claus. Theresa May started her trip in Cape Town, which was particularly apt given that on February 3rd, 1960, another British Prime Minister, Harold Macmillan, said, "The wind of change is blowing through this continent. Whether we like it or not, this growth of national consciousness is a political fact," he said. I refer you to Uganda. Bobby and Barbie Wine have now arrived in the US, but what caught my attention was a video of revelers at a Taras Riley concert while chanting "People Power" through bottles of Baby Cool Eugene. Wiley was on stage performing and later ended his performance. Inflection points are difficult to discern, but this is one right here. A debt crisis and a political inflection point where those who fought for independence hand over to the born-free generation is in fact a double whammy.